welcome to Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. My name is Joshua Bissell, and I'm the producer of this weekly podcast, where we tackle topics of abuse prevention and vulnerable sector protection. We're so thankful that you've chosen to spend your time working towards the protection of the vulnerable and safeguarding those who are in our care. We trust that this time will be beneficial to you. Thank you again for joining us for Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. Here's Melodie.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us today as we unpack another definition often found within safeguarding. The term and definition that we are going to be unpacking today is the term harassment. Harassment is a form of discrimination, and it's also a form of bullying. And we recently talked about bullying, and we defined what bullying is. Often we think about bullying that happens within the playground and online among children. However, people of all ages can be bullies. Well, harassment is a form of discrimination. It's also a form of bullying. It includes any unwanted physical or verbal behavior that offends or humiliates an individual. Generally, harassment is a behavior that persists over time. Serious one-time incidences of harassment can also be considered legally harassment. So there's different forms of harassment. There's sexual, racial, verbal, emotional, psychological harassment. The civil harassment laws say harassment is unlawful violence like assault, battery, or stalking, or it's a credible threat of violence. And the violence or threat can seriously scare, annoy, or harass someone, and there's no valid reason often for that harassment. Canadian laws make criminal harassment an offense punishable by summary conviction or by indictment. The offense currently carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. So this is a serious term that we really need to get our heads around. In Alberta, there was a case where a woman who was employed as a clerk at a food store stated that her employer subjected her to ongoing harassment by asking her to take particular religious courses and to join his church. He made that a condition for employment within a food store. She filed a complaint alleging discrimination on the grounds of religious beliefs in the area of employment. The investigation found merit to the complaint. The employer was fined and imprisoned for the harassment. So today we're going to look at not only the definition, which I've already shared with you, but we're also going to talk about the importance of having this term defined within your policies and procedures and training. It's important to have policies in place around harassment. This is a requirement of insurance companies to qualify for abuse coverage because harassment is a form of abuse. You should have procedures in place on how to deal with allegations of harassment. It's important to include in your training definitions of harassment and speak to the importance of recognizing harassing behavior and having policies that prohibit any form of harassment. It is so important whenever there's an incident of harassment, just like bullying, that an incident report be filled out and that there be zero tolerance for any form of harassment. Often we consider and think of harassment in the terms of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a type of harassment that relates to sexual nature and innuendos, unwelcome or inappropriate promise of rewards in exchange for sexual favors. Sexual harassment can include anything and a wide range of actions from mild transgressions, catcalls, whistling, words, or sexual assault. Harassment can occur in many different social settings, within the workplace, within the home, within school, and within churches. Harassers or victims may be of any gender. As a 16-year-old, I remember being transported to a day camp by a pastor in Northern Ontario. And as he transported me from one location to another location, he sexually harassed me. He spoke to me about sexual things. He never touched me, but he made me feel very uncomfortable in the car as he spoke about some of my body parts and reaction as we sat there in the car. I felt very uncomfortable. That was sexual harassment. Sexual and emotional harassment of employees, coworkers, volunteers, congregation members, or adherents or vendors is not permitted, and that should be clearly communicated within your policies. It should be identified that often there's an imbalance of power, authority, and control wherever there is harassment in place. It should never be a condition of employment or advancement. Too often, sexual harassment is used for employment decisions, raises, favors. The harassment often will have the purpose of interfering, unreasonably interfering with someone's work performance. It can be intimidating, it can be hostile, it can be create a very offensive, uncomfortable environment. Some examples of sexual harassment is unwelcome comments, persistent leering, suggestive looks, displaying pornographic pictures, giving offensive jokes, unnecessary physical touch, whether that's brushing up against someone, leaning against someone, or touching someone. Often it's derogatory language, pressure for personal relationships, intimidation or threats, bragging about sexual prowess, demanding dates or sexual favors, questions or discussions about sexual activities, requiring an individual or an employee to dress in a sexualized, gender-specific way. It could be paternalistic behavior based on someone's gender. It's threats to penalize or otherwise punish a person who refuses to comply with sexual advances. It can include physical assault. There's also racial harassment. Racial harassment is an incident or a series of incidences intended or likely to intimidate someone, to offend someone, or harm someone or a group because of their ethnic origins, their color, their race, their religion, their nationality. A racist incident is any incident that is perceived to be racist by the victim or any other person. Racial harassment includes a comment or conduct which ridicules or undermines someone's race, ethnic, color, or origin or ancestry. Examples of racial harassment can include displaying derogatory or offensive material which relate to race or ethnic origin. It's insulting gestures or jokes related to their race or ethnic origin. It's refusing to work with others because of their racial or ethnic background. There's also emotional and psychological harassment or verbal harassment, and this is any type of abusive behavior that isn't physical, which may include verbal aggression, intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, which most often unfolds as a pattern of behavior over time that aims to diminish the results of someone. It can diminish their sense of identity, their self-worth, their dignity, and often results in anxiety, depression, suicidal behaviors, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Often emotional harassment is made up of a series of incidences, a pattern of behavior that occurs over time. It involves series of repeated incidences which threatens, intimidates, degrades, humiliates another. Often you will find this within the workplace. It can be a submission or a rejection of someone's conduct or the willingness to even work with someone. Psychological harassment has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering, intimidating someone's work performance, or creating an intimidating, hostile, offensive environment. Examples of this can be insults, criticism, aggressive demands, microaggressions, threats of harm, including physical, emotional, spiritual, financial punishment. It is a form of manipulation, harassment, and control. It can be the misuse of spiritual authority that creates an atmosphere of isolation, guilt, shame, bullying, and coercion. It is so important to reduce the risk of harassment, and you do that through mentoring. You do that by being a role model and an example for those that you are working and serving with. You also reduce the risk of harassment when you teach about it and talk about it and give case studies, and you use those case studies to learn from. Another way to reduce the risk of harassment is to invite people into the conversation. Across your organization, invite people into the conversation as to say, how can we learn to better interact, since so many individuals may feel harassed because of their race, their color, their ethnic background, their religious background. How can we best learn from you? We have learned in 2020 that Black Lives Matter. We have learned the importance of including individuals of color into the conversation. How best can we meet the needs of individuals that are so often harassed? If you have a welcoming environment for the LGBTQ+, invite them into the conversation. How can we create a safe environment for you within our workplace, within our places of worship, within our schools, within our community? It's also important to create and nurture a professional setting. If you're mentoring an individual, it should be within a professional setting, within an office, during the hours of operation. Your supervisor should be well informed when you're meeting with individuals. If you're engaging with minors, make sure that you have parental permission to interact with the minor. If mentoring off-site, it should be in a public environment like a coffee shop. Reduce the risk of harassment, whether it be sexual harassment, psychological, racial harassment, by interacting in a group of people. Avoid isolation. If at any time you witness harassing behavior, please speak up. That's why we encourage a whistleblower policy. We want a safe environment for everyone. It is important within safeguarding to have policies against harassment, to define harassment, have procedures on how to respond to harassing behavior, to train against harassment, to fill out incident report forms, and be willing to speak up. Don't stand on the sidelines. Speak up when you feel that someone is being harassed. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Next week, we'll unpack a different definition that we often find within safeguarding. Take care. Bye-bye.